I must say, in the years that I have been a practicing doctor, I think of a phrase from Charles Dickens: these are the best of times and these are the worst of times. First of all, there has been a revolution in medicine in what we can accomplish. When I left my practice, I said goodbye to one of my patients who had a history of breast cancer. In fact, I had diagnosed her with liver metastases 25 years earlier. So things are remarkable. On the other hand, there are parts of medicine today, and parts especially with planning for the future, that bother me tremendously. Let me give you some statistics. In the last month of life, 60 to 65% of patients will be admitted to a hospital. 25% of those patients will be in the ICU. Over 18% of patients will have surgery in the last month of life. 5 to 10% will have chemotherapy. 10 to 15% will have life-prolonging treatments. And 60% of patients will see more than 10 doctors in their last month of life. The average hospice stay is 8 days, but the interesting thing is if your stay in the hospice is 3 days or less, the chances are 40% of the time that you've come out of the ICU. So what does this mean? It really means that we do very poor planning for the end of life. Medicine has come to a point that we tend to be death-avoiding rather than life-affirming. And decisions are very important. One of the problems that we're facing in medicine is doctors don't spend time with patients and families. I happened to be a guest of Calvary Hospital this past week, and it's interesting that even in Calvary Hospital, patients are sent there and their doctors say, we're sending you to Calvary for a rest, and when you recover, come back and we'll give you more chemotherapy. Well, that's not going to happen. So what is very important? In other words, it's very important that there's good communication. Hope depends on truth. If we don't have truth in terms of what's going to happen to us, we don't have real hope. Because suffering is when you find the hope that you had is no longer possible. So this to me is the most important message that one can have. Most of us, if we think about what we really want, what are the goals in life? I think the goals in life at the end of life is to be at home if possible, to be forgiven and to ask forgiveness, to say to your children that I'm proud of you, and to express love to everyone that you have. And in order to do this, you have to converse. In other words, the most important message I'm going to give you is to talk to your loved ones, talk to your children, talk to your spouse on what you would really want to happen when life has a limit. And it's very important to talk to doctors. What are the goals of care? What is possible? You know, there's a saying in medicine, we hope for the best, but we have to plan for the worst. What would we really want to happen to us if we can't be cured? One of the problems in medicine today is what I call treatment that is inappropriate to the disease. What happens? Your mother is 96 years old. She suddenly is short of breath. She goes to the emergency room, and the doctor says, do you want us to do everything? What are your answers? It's a very hard decision at that point. What often happens is patients are put on respirators. At a certain point in a patient's life, a respirator is not an appropriate method, because given certain circumstances, that patient will never get off a respirator. Now, I work with hospice. Age is no longer a criteria. We are taking patients in their hundreds, giving them appropriate care, giving them loving care, and we have to discharge them because they do too well. So if you have a 96-year-old person who is with it and alert and doing well, then go for it. There's no reason to restrict on the basis of age. We have found this. I mean, I've had a 94-year-old man who was caring for his Alzheimer's wife, and I asked if he needed any help, and he said, "What for?" The only thing he wanted me to guarantee is that he could continue driving to Florida every year. So age is no longer a criteria. But at a certain point, when a person lacks capacity, when they're failing, when they're losing weight, when they're obviously failing in life, then a respirator is inappropriate. And we have found in palliative care and hospice that we can control symptoms and keep a person comfortable without using the high tech. The interesting thing is that if one looks at hospice today, hospice really started after I started practicing medicine. And really, Dame Cicely Saunders started hospice in 1967. Palliative care is a way of treating patients who have symptoms that really started in the Cleveland Clinic in the 1980s. And we can do amazing things. One of the paradoxes that we have found today is that at a certain point, palliative care is better than chemotherapy. Now you ask, how can palliative care be better than chemotherapy at a certain point? Well, chemotherapy is like buying a lottery. Now when you buy a lottery, you know you're going to lose money, $1 or $2, with a chance of winning whatever. When you receive chemotherapy at a certain point in your illness, when you're on the 4th round of chemotherapy and the first 3 have failed, the chances of chemotherapy helping you are extremely small. But the toxicity of chemotherapy is very large. For chemotherapy to work, it kills good cells. It causes neuropathy. It causes marked symptoms. And a recent study in the New England Journal of Medicine showed that people who continued active care for advanced lung cancer lived a shorter period of time than people at an appropriate point in illness decided to only have palliative care. Now, palliative care does not mean that you can't have active therapy. One of the things that we have done in my organization is we realize that for some patients, active care is very important. But on the other hand, we need to provide them with palliative care. Palliative care is just good symptom control. We can control nausea and vomiting. We can control pain very effectively today. We control many symptoms, and there are ways of doing this within the context of even active care. Victoria will be talking about hospice. Now, why is communication so important? When you have 3 siblings, when you have 2 daughters and a son, and their mother or father suddenly is in the intensive care unit, suddenly in the hospital, it's very hard to make a decision on what is the right thing to do. And one of the beacons of light is what your parents or your spouse has told you, what they want. This helps guide you. It helps relieve your anxiety. And it also communicates important values. What is important to you? What do you want at the end of life? These are very important things. Doctors are not trusted today. 55% of doctors say they lie to patients. They call it white lies, but they're not telling you the truth about the real course of the illness. So it's very important to realize that there has to be better communication among yourselves and with the physicians. So all of these are very important. There are many resources in the community today to help you and to guide you in this area. Let me talk a little bit about do not resuscitate. I don't like do not resuscitate, strangely enough, being in hospice. Because unless you have a terminal illness, you may be denied care in the hospital. I hate to tell this to Katie Griffin, but it's true. In other words, do not resuscitate means sometimes that hospitals don't treat you with the same intensity that you might be treated otherwise. On the other hand, being resuscitated when you are at the end of life, when you have advanced cancer or advanced other illnesses, really leads to extreme pain, even if you survive, and the chances of surviving are less than 5% initially. And then death occurs within the next 2 weeks or so. This is not true of a senior can be resuscitated, and successfully, if they are not at the end of life. But if you're at the end of life, it is something we unfortunately see in the television, that there's a 75% chance of being resuscitated. But the actual resuscitation is very low. Let me give you some legal issues. Number one, it's very important to have a healthcare proxy. A healthcare proxy really says that if I can't make decisions for myself, I am appointing somebody to make decisions for me. You don't want to be in a position where a doctor or a hospital doesn't know what to do. You want to appoint a loved one to make decisions for you. This is very important. And if you have, let's say, an elderly spouse or a father or mother who would not want to be brought to the hospital, you must have either an in-home hospital, a DNR, or something called a MULST form. An ambulance driver is not allowed to not bring you to the hospital and not resuscitate you, even if you tell them that you're their healthcare proxy, because ambulance drivers cannot make that decision. So if in an emergency somebody, let's say, collapses at home and he has or she has advanced dementia, and you don't want the person brought to the hospital when you see that things are not doing well, if an ambulance is called and they arrive, they will be brought to the hospital, they will be resuscitated, unless you have a MULST form or in hospital, do not resuscitate. I've been speaking for a while. I see a little glazed expression on people's things. I don't know whether we should have some questions now. Maybe now's a good time. Yes?
I'm thinking about my parents as I listen to you. They don't want to talk about any of this. They don't want to, and they're both 29. Do you have any suggestions on a way to approach elderly people because communication is so important, in ways that they won't shut down or that it's so frightening to them?
That's a very good question. You know, sometimes you can say that we need it to communicate to your children, that you're having a conversation with your children, and you don't know what to tell your children to do. What would they advise you to tell your children?
That's good.
You know, take it out of what they want and ask, because what does a parent love? A parent loves to have a child ask for advice.
And I can even say, you know, just at this interesting seminar.
And I want to tell my children what to do for myself. And what advice would you tell me to tell my children? So sort of put it in a third person, or you can say a friend of yours is facing this, and what advice would they give your friend? Take it out of them and put it in a sort of third person context. That would be the one.
Can I put a plug in before we go on? Shannon White, Presbyterian clergy. Some of you may remember her from being on the Channel 12 News as a reporter. Has written this book, The Invisible Conversations with Your Aging Parents. There are copies available here if you want to pick one up. They're $11 a piece. If you don't have the 11, take one. But Shannon is now the senior pastor of the Wilton Presbyterian Church, just having been called there. It is a worthwhile resource. Thank you.
You know, and sometimes, you know, you can ask, what is important to them, what lessons can you do for your children. There's also a very good resource that I have on a sheet here. There's the Ken Hamilton Caregiver Center at Northern Westchester Hospital. Jerry Rosenfeld is the nicest, most intelligent person that I know, except for some of the people in this room.
Good save.
In spite of the fact that she's a social worker, and can also help you with this. But these are important questions. Yes.
I just want to mention that a neighbor of mine had his insurance agent ask those questions of his parents while in his presence. And because there was a third party there asking the questions, it wasn't that difficult for the parents to respond to it.
That's another very good
answer.
Yes.
You named a document I'd not heard of before, healthcare proxy.
MOLST, M-O-L-S-T.
M-O-L-S-T.
I think
Victoria's going to speak about that.
it.
Okay.
New York State is a very regulated state. And a ordinary healthcare proxy is not valid in the home. Why? Because legislators had to make a decision. So you need a special healthcare proxy for home use or a MOLST form. A MOLST form is a bright, shocking pink form.
We have copies of it in your folders, but they're not the pink.
That
But that's the actual.
that actually protects a person so that their wishes are transparent from home into the hospital area. And this is very important. Yes?
Just wondering what your take was on the nursing home that wouldn't resuscitate on the 9/11 call.
That's a very hard issue. I mean, I think people should have the right to be resuscitated unless they don't want to be resuscitated. On the other hand, the wisest thing for a state to have is to be resuscitated except in a terminal illness. In other words, if you expect a person to not survive within the next several weeks, then it's cruel to resuscitate a person because you're going to break all of their ribs. They're going to die a very painful death. I mean, this is part of resuscitation. Unfortunately, we're hit with these outliers. Terry Shrivo, this case of the nurse not resuscitating. And these are not the real issues. The real issue is, I think she made a mistake, but on the other hand, I think she did it probably out of compassion. Now, I really haven't read a lot about the case. But it's very painful for a doctor to be asked to resuscitate a patient when you know that it is futile and you're like assaulting a person. And this is one of the awful parts of medicine. But, again, there was a breakdown in the system. In other words, this is what I'm telling you, that we all have a responsibility for ourselves and our loved ones to make sure that our goals of care, what we really want to happen to us at the end of life. And one of my nurses that I work with talks about a time bank. We all live within a limited amount of time. And at the end of time, when things are getting close, we have to ask ourselves, where would we want to be, under what circumstances, and what treatment? And this is where we have to protect ourselves, and more than protect ourselves, in a positive way, empower ourselves to be in a position where we can achieve our goals.
Thank you, Dr. Federman. Victoria.
I
hospice care in Westchester and Putnam as well. But thank you for being here.
Thank you all, appreciate it. How many of you have a healthcare proxy? Very impressive, I have to say. Do you know, even among the hospice staff and families, you know, and people we work with, a lot of times it is a very difficult thing to even address. We're facing really our own mortality and a possibility we're not going to be in control and we have to rely on someone else to make those decisions. What I do with families is I approach it from a perspective that in order to have control, you may have to give up some control. So when you're looking at a healthcare proxy, in order to have control, meaning that your wishes, wants, and needs will be addressed, you have to acknowledge and designate somebody that can do that when you don't have control. Without a healthcare proxy, many people, you know, a person can make decisions based on emotion, based on need, based on a lot of other circumstances at the time. So again, in order to have control, you may have to give up some control sometimes. And I think in approaching it that way, it becomes a little more palatable. It is a very tough decision to make because nobody wants to face the fact, obviously, that we may not be able to make decisions for ourselves. It takes a lot of courage to be able to talk about this and to have a conversation. And picking up on what Hal says, a lot of times these conversations can be really used in the present moment when you're seeing and you're hearing about death and dying in the newspaper. It's a good time to begin to have a conversation, a dialogue with your children as to what I may want in the future. If we don't have a healthcare proxy, social workers and nurses a lot of times are exploring with families, hospitals through ethics committees, they're trying to get families together to begin to have a conversation what this person was about. And a lot of times we die very much the way we live. And we don't change too much. And if you know somebody, and you know their coping and their style and their personality, then many times you can hopefully make some decisions that will reflect what they would have wanted if they could do it themselves. So really conversations can start at any moment. And they can be very, very simple conversations and even stories about the past history. You know, what was Grandma? What happened to Grandma when she died? What did you think about that? Would that be something you want? You can also explore some myths. My personal life, my father tells a story about his father who died from prostate cancer in the hospital. What he remembers only is that they tied him down. And it was, at that time, we didn't have the resources and medication and the morphine and the knowledge of antipsychotic drugs. His view is that they tied him down when he had pain. In order for me to have a conversation to understand what his needs would be, I'd have to kind of talk about those myths and his anxiety about that experience. Reframe it. Technology today is very different. Medications we have today are very, very different. So we can also alleviate some anxiety by having conversation. Culture and myths. I remember talking to a Jamaican woman after her mother died and talked about spirits and ghosts and was very frightened. So certainly our culture, our religion, our background provide us with a framework also for how we may experience or what we want when we die. So really talking about past history is a great conversation. Talking about culture, talking about today's society, using the newspapers and anything that you can use as a way to begin, as Hal said, keep it a little bit away from you. But it begins to frame, boy, I wouldn't want it that way, or boy, I would really want it that way. There's a wonderful resource online. It's called the 5 Wishes. But basically, what it is, it's having a conversation. But something we should all think about. How do I want to be treated when I'm gone? Some people, personality-wise, love people around them. I'm sure you know. Some people always want to have family around them. I personally tend to like to do my thing individually and personally. I may not want a lot of people around me. I may not want people around me when I die. I may want to take that journey on my own. I may not want to be a burden to others. I'm a caregiver. I'm a social worker, so I'm more like giving. So even talking about how do you want to be treated when you die? How do you want to be remembered? Do you want people around you? Do you want a lot of pain medicine? Now, not everybody, Hal knows. We have people, and it frustrates the heck out of us because we feel that we're the experts on pain medicine. They're non-compliant. They refuse to want it. For them, having pain may be living. Maybe having pain and having chronic pain all their lives may be a way that they're connected to life. It may have secondary gains. If you have pain, you may get more attention. You may get your family involved. You may engage people more. If you're too well managed, sometimes what happens? Oh, they're doing okay. We don't make many visits in the hospital. They're, you know, you can be ignored. So you want to know how do you feel about pain? Again, what are your religious and cultural beliefs? How do you interpret them? You know, we can all be Presbyterians or Catholics and have very different interpretations of hydration and food. Big issue in hospice. Less is more. Whole different philosophy. As you go through life, you know, the continuum of life, more is usually better. More PT, more food because you're going to be restored. You're going to do better. That's the hope. End stage illness. Less is more. When people are dying, less food, less interaction, more sleeping. Those are all indications and need to be respected even as a healthcare proxy. That less is more is better when I'm dying. It's a whole different experience. It's the opposite of coming into the world. You're letting go, you're detaching, you're withdrawing. So people need to know that. And the people you pick should really be people or person that can really honor those wishes, despite the connections emotionally. You know, you can have children that really can't do that. You can have people that love you very dearly, but they can't visit in the hospital. It's not an indication whether they love you or not. Everybody has their own capacity, their own experiences to do, and hopefully will do the best they can to represent your needs. So when you're looking, New York State Healthcare Proxy says, decide your wishes. Get a real sense of what you want. The proxy can be as very simple as, let my son make all the decisions for me. I trust him. I don't want to get into that too much. That's okay. Or very detailed as to what you want. If you want antibiotics, if you want medications, if you want IV, if you want to be on a vent. There are people that want everything. They value life. They'll go on a vent. They'll do anything to avoid death. I have talked with them. They said, no matter what, as long as I can breathe, it doesn't matter how I breathe, I want to be alive. Other people say, I'm fine. As soon as I don't have capacity to care for myself, I just want nature to take its course. What do you say also? Do not resuscitate as allow natural death. We have to reframe that thinking also. You know, we always think we're withholding. Withholding is not necessarily a bad thing. Simplifying is not necessarily a bad thing. So you want to make sure your wishes are known, that you have a conversation, if you can, with your proxy before you have it. And you should review your proxy. How I feel now may be very different how I feel when I'm 85 or 90, right? It changes. Even the status of a DNR, sometimes people have DNRs in the hospital, they come home, they do a little better. We need to review that again. They may not want that DNR, or they may still want that DNR. So one thing you have to remember is that you can review these, you can change these. Nothing is written in stone, and you should do that. Living wills, by the way, are more of a narrative of what it's about. A living will may give you more, lawyers usually could draw those up for you. You can do it yourself. You can write some just wishes to attach to your healthcare proxy. Kind of gives them more of a flavor of what's important to you. It may even include funeral arrangements, how you want to be remembered. So living wills are also very important. So again, if you're going to have a proxy, and 80% of you do, trust the person in your life. Make sure they're sophisticated enough to understand the complicated questions that Kathy is going to be talking about, the medical questions, the benefits, and the burdens of each treatment can be very, very difficult to decide on. And especially in a crisis, right? When you already took, do I give this, do I not, do I have this? Very confusing. Be strong enough to stay true to your wishes, to be tough enough to make those decisions. Be persistent enough to fight for you and what you want. Sometimes it's tough, but to have a voice. And to be able to really be connected to in a moment's notice, because obviously if the hospital has you in the emergency room and they need to call a proxy, you want to make sure they're going to be available. And take it very seriously, that you really trusted them with your life, with your dying, which is a very sacred and powerful moment. As I said, living wills are more of a direction and a narrative. It's more of a conversation with the person and how you want to see this play out. The Family Health Decisions Act, which is in New York State, is saying that if you don't pick somebody, New York State can give it by nature of the relationships. So based on the Family Health Decision Act, usually it's your spouse, then your child, and they can begin to make it, hospital can then go and ask them to make decisions. I know from hospitals down at Sound Shore, Northern Westchester, we always want to have the family in sync. We want to have them on board. It's very hard to have the oldest child be in conflict with the youngest child, right, Hal? We want to have the family at peace with these decisions, but it's much more complicated when there is a lot of different opinions regarding something. So again, having a healthcare proxy, being clear on your proxy, having a living will, helps the person that's designated have this. Say, look, you know, Mom wants this. This is truly what she wished for. My understanding is once you pick a proxy, there's no expiration date. So you can have a proxy that's 10 years old. If you don't revisit it, that's the person that's going to be picked if they show up with the proxy. Make sure the hospital has a copy, your doctor has a copy, that the proxy has a copy, everybody has a copy.
And your pastor.
And your pastor, very important. You're going to talk about that, how critical that is. So really, and then Hal mentioned do not resuscitate. In hospice, when we're talking about burdens and benefits and less is more, not eating may not be the worst thing, but in our culture, not being able to eat and allowing somebody not to eat because they don't feel like it is a very hard thing for a lot of people to understand. But it is a very important piece because sometimes that's allowing nature. And by forcing people to do what their nature, what their body is saying, actually makes things more complicated and more symptomatic. So we try to look at whose needs are you meeting. You know, sometimes my culture, I'm Italian, food, like many cultures, very important, part of nurturing. We want to kind of understand that. So a proxy that designates the person, say, no artificial feedings. It may be very hard when I'm actually dying for maybe my son to say, what are you talking about? Because, you know, you get better, you get stronger, she likes to eat. It doesn't make sense. So you need somebody that's able to hear and understand that dying is very different. It's a whole different culture. Isabel, our educational nurse, we're in the midst of orienting a nurse, and she said, you know, nurses are always looking for restoring. But when you're talking about death, it has its own medical needs, its own way of treating, its own way of approaching things. Hal mentioned briefly the molds form, usually only within the last year of life. It's usually for people that are terminal or chronic because it has orders in it. It also has a healthcare proxy in it. It has the DNR, the molds is also a DNR. The importance of this, if you have an elderly person, is that it transfers and that you don't need a non-hospital DNR in the community and a hospital DNR in the hospital. It works to transfer. So an EMT, an ambulance can take this and they will honor and respect it.
That's in their packet?
No, I don't. Well, it's really not appropriate to just give to everybody. There's a copy of it in the packet because I don't think anybody here, you would want to have a healthcare proxy. And, you know, obviously if you're really very sick, then you would address the do not resuscitate. I think it's 90 days for a DNR, and then it constantly has to be updated and reviewed because situations change. A MOLT's usually a year expectancy, or a terminal status where you just have made a decision that you don't want anything heroic. It can be as clear as IVs and doctor's orders that will follow the patient around. Hot pink. Hospitals are usually initiated, and I know you'll be talking about that more in the future. Any questions regarding advanced directives?
I just want to make one point. There's a very good concept I call a time-limited trial. In the middle of the night, your mother or father or sister or brother has a stroke, and the doctor calls you, what should we do? You don't have to make a life and death decision at that point. You can go ahead and say, we're going to try to see what happens, but if it doesn't work, we're going to revisit it at the end of a week or 2 weeks. Nothing that you do should be forever. So you don't have to make a decision. If you're uncomfortable making a decision, you don't have to make a decision. You can make a decision in a positive way. Let's try to see what will happen. Anything that you do can be revisited. It's not a permanent solution. So you should never be in a position where you have to make decisions that your heart tells you is not the right time to make those decisions.
Thank you, that's helpful. Art, you had a question?
Yeah, sort of about discussing this with your siblings and stuff. I have power of attorney and all this stuff for an elderly woman who is in an assisted living. I'm in primary position. Her only living son is secondary position. Should I go over this with him? Is she-
Definitely.
Okay,
Yeah,
because
you-
he's sort of missing in action in many ways. That's why I'm in primary position.
Yeah, but you must discuss this, because the worst thing in the world is to be in a position where you're a healthcare proxy and the son doesn't know this, and he's going to feel that you're trying to take advantage of his mother.
He's fully aware of what our position is at this point.
Is she
And he
alert
agreed
and
to it and signed off on it.
She's alert and oriented, right? She's
Excuse me?
alert and oriented, she has capacity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she should also
She
be
should
part
be
of,
a part of
she
that.
should be part of that
Yeah.
conversation.
She has moments when I'm not sure she really is with us, but that's okay.
I must say that one of the things that we're seeing today is family conflicts, you know. And there's a very good book that I didn't put down here called They're Your Parents Too. Where, you know, who's taking care of mom, you know, I've been doing it, and, you know, let's have you pull your weight. So, this is an issue today that we see quite often.
I just want to respond to that. We have a phrase, social workers, we call it the California syndrome. Because what happens is you have a family member here, or the prodigal son. The daughter is taking care, I'm going to use the daughter's taking care, doing everything. And then the other daughter comes and, you know, upsets the whole thing. Because certainly wants the recognition, wants to connect with the parent, whatever. Causes a lot of conflict. You know, the story of the daughter that's doing the primary care says, you know, I've been here all this time, very much the prodigal son. Why are you paying so much attention to this other one that just came in? And it's about relationships and the importance of validating their relationships, but it causes a lot of family conflict. And a lot of times, hospital staff, hospice staff, social workers, all of us are in a triangle. And they're acting out a lot of drama that we try to kind of bring it down a little bit. But it, you know, it's that the person that hasn't been involved, you know, coming in and all of a sudden, right, challenging, questioning, showing that they do care, and understandably so, but it's, you know, family history. Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
We haven't talked about hospice.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about hospice,
Please.
information about hospice. The statistics show that people on hospice live longer than without hospice, with a terminal illness. The reason is because of the care. We have people doing so well on hospice, we have to sometimes decertify them because they've stabilized, they've gotten the medication management, they get the nursing, which is monitoring and assessing symptoms and status changes. We have our medical director on top of all the cases, directing us with the primary physician. The primary physician remains, you know, responsible, but we have also Hal. We have social workers doing the psychosocial, working on the family dynamics, hopefully working on forgiveness and peace, doing life review. We have volunteers that act as friendly visitors and give time and support and unconditional love and acceptance to the patient. We have home health aides, as you know how valuable that is for somebody to give personal care. And what we find statistically, that people actually live longer. They will still die, but they'll live longer, they'll live at home, they'll live more comfortably. So it's a phenomenal program. It is an entitlement when people are very uncomfortable about talking about hospice, because where they're saying, oh my God, it means I'm dying. It means you're living, and we're going to care for you, and we're going to give quality care. It's Medicare and insurances have a benefit for hospice. Hospice is very different than visiting nurse and home care, and here's the deal. Visiting nurse and home care get paid based on a skilled need, based on an acute condition. Hospice gets paid based on a prognosis and a 6-month or less expectation. Very different. Home care gets paid fee for service. Every time the nurse goes in, every time the physical therapist goes in, they bill Medicare. Hospice gets paid a daily rate to be case managers, providing all the support, counseling, appliances, equipment, everything, 24/7. So it's a service without walls. We have to do everything within that period of time. We are the case managers. So when people are in hospice, they don't always come on because they have a skilled need, but they have a prognosis of 6 months or less. That's not written in stone. That was originally a Medicare guideline. It just says that we have to look at that person and see that there are changes. We've had people on how, 1 year to 2 years, because they keep meeting the criteria, which is loss of weight, functional changes, mental changes, pain management, other symptoms. So hospice is an entitlement. And if you feel that somebody has an end-stage illness, cancer, cardiac, ALS, dementia, failure to thrive, which is just people who at a certain age, they just lose interest, right? We call it debility unspecified now. They lose interest, they're just nature, their body's just saying, I want to just let go. If you have a question, you should have the conversation. We do so well with our patients. 80% stay at home, 80% are comfortable, and usually have a very peaceful or a good death, if there's such a thing. And I do believe in a good death. You know, when you have all your wishes and wants and needs being met, that's a pretty good death. We do work with the hospitals. We have a very close relationship with Northern Westchester Hospital. If patients' symptoms are out of control, we can admit to the hospital. We will never deny treatment, right, Hal? If somebody needs something, maybe you want to address that. Complicated cases who need to be hospitalized or families can't manage or cope, we have special funds and money to help with home health aides. But maybe you could talk a little bit about hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, there are two aspects. Number one, one of the problems in medicine today is that under our government guidelines, there's an infinite amount of money for active care, and there's no money for social care, no money for the home. And this is really a tragedy. We're the only developed country in the world that has such a disproportionate amount of money for active care and no money for other care. One of the advantages of hospice is you can leave hospice at any time without penalty and come right back. So, I mean, and there's no limit on it. So that if we find a patient would benefit from a more active intervention, we can send them to the hospital, decertify them, have the active care done, and then bring them right back. It's a loophole, but it's a marvelous loophole. And this is very important when we deal especially with younger people with cancer. That we have the ability to sort of be the best of both worlds. And there is no, so it's not like you're signing on and then you've locked the door to any other care. And this is very important. In fact, we take care of children. Now, children are different. With children, we have no limitation. We can continue whatever active care there is to be done, as well as hospice care, without any penalty whatsoever. But thankfully, we don't have to worry about too many children.
Top age for children?
What?
What is the top age for children?
What do you mean the top age?
Well, I mean, you have special care for children.
I
Is
think
it
it's
21? Is it?
It's 18 or 21. It's New York State. New York State has a special program for children where they put them on a Medicaid system. I think it's called Child Care Plus. And what happens is that they don't deny anything. They'll actually give additional cares than we give to provide whatever they can for children. So it's a remarkable program.
Yeah, and there's no limitation on what we do for children.
So you hear the ads all the time for Calvary. So
Yes.
why do people choose that as opposed to working with you? Is it because people need much
Well, there are
more
two
care?
things. Calvary is an acute care hospital, and we work very closely with Calvary. I was there out of this last 5 days, 3 days in Calvary, and basically we send patients to Calvary if they have problems that we can't manage at home. Sometimes head and neck cancers are very difficult to manage at home. But Calvary also discharges patients. They're not there for an infinite period of time. They have to have an acute need with Calvary. So Calvary is very good for patients who have needs that can't be met in the home area. The other resource in the area is Rosary Hill. Rosary Hill is a Catholic institution but non-denominational. The only thing is they're a little prejudiced. If you have money, they don't like you.
He's serious about that. They don't take a dime.
What?
They do not take a dime.
They don't take a dime.
They don't take a dime. So they really have an obligation to serve the disadvantaged in our community. So that this is their charter, and what?
They have an endowment that's specifically for cancer patients. They cannot take any
Any
other
other patient.
patient, where Calvary does take end stage,
That's right.
you know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Pam?
Charles mentioned that sometimes, that quite frequently, people don't even get that kind of hospice stamp until so late in the game. So as family members, or, you know, as someone who is going to be discussing that with parents or our own healthcare options, you know, what power do we have there? Do we just need a doctor who's a little more enlightened, or? You know,
well, you don't need a doctor initially. In other words, we will go out and assess the situation. Anybody can call. You can call us. We'll assess the situation. And if we think the patient is appropriate for hospice, we'll contact the doctor. So you don't have to wait for the doctor.
So it's really people just not knowing about it. That's why
That's
they're
right.
so often.
Yeah.
Too late.
That and quite frankly, Dr. Federman is not one of them, but the doctor's reluctance to let go. That was my experience in ministry. And the greatest, well, not the greatest regret, but people waited far too long and missed the advantages of hospice care at a much earlier stage in their life. It would have been a totally different scene. But far too often, and I think both Hal and Victoria can tell you, hospice gets called into the scene at the very end.
Literally, we've had patients who've died literally within an hour of being called.
Even on admission. You know,
On
because it's
admission.
been so close,
And often, I think our average length of stay is just 2 weeks. And yet, we can't give the benefit that we really can give by
So we need to
That's
have
the-
our families
that's the
to
point,
talk to
right,
them
yeah.
to say, if the doctor says anything that's, that even hints of 6 months or less, that we can call in hospice ourselves and.
Yeah, and the other thing is we have in a service called palliative care. Now, palliative care means that you will have the benefit of more active care, and many times by going on palliative care first, we can transition to hospice care when it's appropriate. So we're providing both ends of the spectrum.
We really, I mean, and I want to say this, we're part of the VNA of Hudson Valley. I've got to give a plug to the VNA of Hudson Valley, which is a continuum of care. They have baby services for infants and newborns with the home care program. We have the home care program. We have a psychiatric program component to the home care. We have hospice. We have palliative care. And we even have a bereavement program. And I do want to just spend 1 minute talking about bereavement because this is that okay? It is a very important program. It is a program under hospice. Families that come on will get 13 months of correspondence and letters. Grief is a normal reaction to loss. We know that every time we have a risk, we take a risk when we love someone, there's a chance there's going to be some type of change or transition. So grief is normal. Our role is to normalize grief. A lot of people don't have families and places to go to talk about it. So we have a free service to the community. And not only do we deal with the hospice families that have lost, but anybody can call at any time and get some free sessions of counseling, sometimes 1 or 2 sessions to tell your story, how it happened, kind of helps you to desensitize, put it in perspective, find deeper meaning to what this challenge in life is for you and your family. Can be very helpful. We have bereavement groups. We have one at Northern Westchester Hospital, Hudson Valley, all over the county. So I just want you to know, we also have a caring circle program for children. You don't have to be on hospice or have a hospice experience. It's open, it's free. It is in Yorktown and Yonkers, and we have a site that we're trying to start up in New Rochelle. Very powerful, free if you know children, families that have had a loss or have had a trauma. Call us. We'd be glad to talk with them, give them some time. We're very fortunate. We have a healing arts program attached to hospice. Hal and I were just talking about music, the power of music. We know when patients are dying, music can really help soothe. Good opportunity for life review, helping them in transition to letting go. We have an art therapist that works with families, not only children but adults, to create objects of remembrance, maybe a shared experience for the family that will be treasured for years to come. So we have a very extensive bereavement program that is free. And anybody who needs anything, please call us.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm going to give you a 5-minute stand-up to either stand up, shake those legs, or go out and get something to eat. Sir.
One question was asked. Does hospice deal with nursing homes? Yes. A hospice benefit, it deals with a nursing home as a place of residence. Now, nursing homes sometimes don't like hospice because then they don't get paid by Medicare. So if a patient is a long-term patient of a nursing home and private pay, then we can, or Medicaid, we can go in and we provide our own aid, we provide everything for that patient within a nursing facility.
They have to have a contract with us.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we can't just, we can't just go to a nursing home and stay, right? We have to go through a whole
Contract. But we're contracted with Waterford Hills, with Sarah, with several nursing homes in the area.
And now we get to the final portion of our workshop today, which is the funeral and memorial planning portion of it. Let me begin simply by saying there is no greater gift that you can give to your family or loved ones than to sit down and plan out what it is you want to happen when death occurs. Not an easy thing to do. It forces you to make decisions, and yet there is no greater gift that when death occurs, bingo, there it is. Decisions don't have to be made. Decisions that, you know, if without the planning, people just, it's a terrible time, physically, emotionally, spiritually, in terms of having to make decisions, and decisions have to be made. So, the greatest gift that you can give is to plan it out now. And our hope is that by the time we're finished, you will have the wherewithal to do that. The first decision that has to be made when death occurs, and you see we're trying to do it beforehand, is what funeral home do you call? All right, we're blessed in this congregation to have Billy LaPierre, who is the owner and operator of Clark Funeral Home in Yorktown Heights, whom I have worked with for 30 years. And quite frankly, that's the place of my choice. So you need to make the decision of what funeral home are you going to call. You need to, and quite frankly, I would encourage people to make arrangements with the funeral director long before time of death. Everything then is in place, and the family has been given a huge gift. So Bill's going to walk us through a couple of points. He's the expert. He's got stories that he can tell. We can both tell.
We've
Sir.
had a lot of stories. Right after September 11th, when the first arrangements
Yes.
were made, were us together.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm a family-owned funeral home. We've been in Yorktown since 1955. The difference between a family place and a corporation is we want people to feel like they're part of our family. There's no pressure to do anything. If you came in and said, I want to do it as cheap as I can, you wouldn't be insulting me. I feel that you help the community, and the community takes care of you. So whatever we can do to help people, we try. And so we're talking about funerals, either two things, cremation or a burial. If you have a burial, you hopefully have already purchased a grave. If you haven't, you should go and purchase one if that's the way you want to go. We talked briefly about what we like to call a celebration of life. A lot of people will have a cremation and do things very simple, and then afterwards set up a memorial service. And we could do that here at the church, or we could do it at your home. We've done them at restaurants, where you bring in posters of all the good times. And I tell people, bring in the funniest photos they can find. The polyester and the family vacations, because you want to remember all the great moments you had in your life together as a family. And part of the therapy is going through all those pictures as a family and creating these big boards of, of photos. It's a great way to do it. It's not for everybody. We can still do a traditional funeral. You can still do the wake and the service and the burial. But there are a lot of different options, and you should really go through a couple different options and see what's comfortable for you. Right?
For example, you've got the traditional visitation at the funeral home.
Traditional visitation used to be 3 days, if you remember. And it dwindled down to 2 days, and then it's typically 1 day. And lately we've been seeing just meeting an hour before a service. So that's dwindling down even more. It's what you feel comfortable with. I've worked with hospice for years. They have a phenomenal program. And you notice that people in that hospice program are, when they finally get to my stage, there's a relief. It's like, thank God it's everything's over. We're so at peace, and you can actually walk through with the family and because of the foundation they've laid. They also have a phenomenal bereavement counsel program here in Westchester, and St. Pat's, is that right? Yeah, they're super.
Tell us about one of the other decisions that people have to do is in terms of a casket.
Caskets. Caskets come in all different shapes and sizes. They all serve the same purpose. I like to tell people, by the time you put flowers on the casket and the kneeler in front, you don't see a whole lot of the casket. It used to be a tradition. Well, the old world Italians believed that you were going to rise up out of the grave, and so they wanted the bronze and the copper that's survived in the ground. Right there, you're nodding your head. I have a $17,000 bronze casket, and I sell it 3 or 4 times a year to an old world Italian family that wants. They go, Billy, just show me the best. I don't want to see anything else.
What's the minimum that you need to have?
The minimum that you need to have for, well, if we're going to a grave, it's a little bit different than a cremation. If we're doing a cremation, we have a rental casket. It's a beautiful oak casket, and you rent it. The entire interior of the casket, after you have your services, the entire interior comes out, and it has a lid, and that piece goes to the crematory, and the shell, the expensive part, the wood, stays at the funeral home. So it's very inexpensive, $1,000.
Recyclable.
Yeah. Caskets, they start at $500. They go to, I know of one that's $27,000, and they get crazy. Same thing with graves. Graves will start at $3,000. We recently, in the last 2 years, did a mausoleum for $800,000. So, yeah, people, there's a lot of guilt. People feel, that's why it's so important to talk and get it done with, while you're not pressured. Yeah, they can do, you can do a day of calling hours with a cremation and be under $10,000. You can be in that $5,000, $6,000 range. You can have a day of calling hours with a casket. Once you start getting to the cemeteries, there's an opening charge at the cemetery, which can be very high. It ranges between $850 to $3,500 on a weekend for overtime charge. So that right there is an outside charge that starts to make a funeral expensive. $15,000 is not uncommon for a funeral, for a day of calling hours, a mass and a burial, or service and a burial.
But there are cheaper ways of doing it.
Cheaper ways of doing it. The least expensive way is called direct cremation. The person passes away, we come to the house or to the nursing home, we pick up the person, they're placed in a cremation container, and they're brought to the crematory. It's, I think, $2,500 plus outside charges, which are death certificates. They're $10 a piece. In Westchester County, New York City, they're $15 a piece. Obituaries, were you going to talk about that?
You're going to listen to this.
I like to warn people about obituaries because we don't think this way. They bring on more problems than what they're worth. A long time ago, it was a means to get the word around that somebody passed away, but the reality is anybody that comes to a wake or service is found out by word of mouth. Paid death notices run between $600 and $800 per line. The ones that you see from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, they're $1,800 a day. Some funeral homes will tell you you have to do them because they like to see the little ad on the bottom. It's advertising. The disadvantages are it lets people know when you're not in your house. The old tradition of going to church and then driving by the house on the way to the cemetery, that was to see if people were stealing from you. That's how that tradition.
Don't laugh. Don't laugh.
We've had 4 houses in Yorktown robbed in the last 10 years. And one house, they brought a moving truck. They actually took the pictures off the wall. Amazing, yeah. The other thing is, you would never put your birth date or the mother's maiden name because they take out credit cards in the person's name, and then you have to prove it wasn't that person. The other thing is solicitors. They'll start calling. Do I sell a house? I sell headstones. This one gentleman called this poor widow and said, I'm a friend of your son's, I'm a financial manager, I'll take care of everything, I'll send you some paperwork. She wrote all of her bank account numbers down, she signed it all away. I like to tell people because we don't think this way. The reality is, you can always do an obituary at a later date when everything is over. All the close relatives and friends find out by word of mouth. It's always announced in churches and bulletins, and it's a complete waste of money. But some people feel the need. The other thing is, if you want to write up a nice biography, we can also do that, print it up and laminate it, and put it by the register stand when you have your service, so people know the biography.
Or if you have the worship, memorial worship here at church, it would be part of the bulletin. Ideal way of doing it. Thanks. Victoria?
Embalming, that is not a regulation in New York State?
Embalming is not, you do not have to have embalming in New York State. It is mandated by the funeral home for the type of service that you choose. If you're going to have any type of viewing in my facility, we require embalming. And that's for sanitary reasons. People become disillusioned. They don't know what happens to a body in a week. I very often get people that go, well, this weekend's not convenient. Can we do it next weekend, but we won't want embalming?